If you've ever known an old man who's lived through more dust storms than most folks have lived summers, you can probably picture Earl. Gray around the temples, slow in speech, but with eyes that could make a rattlesnake think twice. That morning started like every other. Roosters crowing, goats bleating, coffee steaming. Earl rocked on his porch, wooden boards creaking beneath boots older than most marriages. Then came the crunch of gravel, a sound that told him his peace had just ended. Up the drive marched Trevor Bolton, shiny badge stitched to his windbreaker like he practiced authority in the mirror. Behind him, Karen Whitmore trekked along, clutching a clipboard so heavy with regulations it could double as armor. Trevor didn't bother knocking. He barked out his declaration about unauthorized structures and livestock violations before Earl even raised an eyebrow. Karen chimed in about chipped paint and non-compliant aesthetics. Earl listened, sipping his coffee slow. That patience wasn't weakness. It was the weight of experience holding back a storm. When Trevor puffed up and said the HOA could seize offending property, Earl finally moved. Calm, deliberate. He placed his mug down, stood just long enough to stretch, then sat back again, this time with his old shotgun resting harmlessly across his knees. The air froze. "You sure you want to finish that sentence, son?" His voice rolled low, calm enough to rattle nerves. Trevor's face drained of color. Karen gasped like the air got slapped out of her. For a moment, the world was silent, except for a crow whose timing could have been scripted by fate. That was how the morning peace ended, not with shouting, but with quiet certainty from a man who'd long ago stopped bluffing. Before the story kicks into gear, quick moment of peace, folks. If you're enjoying the ride already, give this story a like, subscribe for more tales that test nerves and tickle common sense, and drop a comment for good old Earl down below. All right, back to the porch. Trouble never knocks. It just struts in wearing polished shoes. Trevor thought his HOA badge made him the law of the land. He crossed that no trespassing sign like it was invisible, clipboard Queen Karen trailing with pursed lips ready to judge the world. Earl didn't rise, didn't stir. The coffee steam coiled beside him like a signal to stay calm. Trevor talked about bylaws. Karen talked about community standards. Together, they sounded like a rehearsal for tyranny. "You've got unauthorized livestock within community limits," Trevor declared. Earl blinked once, unimpressed. "Those goats were here before the ink dried on that neighborhood charter," he said. Karen pointed at the porch. "And that chipped paint violates Section 12.3. The more they spoke, the more Earl's patience grew dangerous. Trevor stepped closer. "Final warning, sir. Non-compliance will result in seizure and legal escalation." That word seizure hung in the air like the scent of rain before lightning. That's when Earl did what legends always do, made one small move that said everything. He leaned forward, brought that shotgun across his lap, and looked Trevor square in the chest. "Now, that sounded like a threat to me. You sure you want to finish that sentence?" Trevor froze. Even Karen's hand trembled around her phone. What followed wasn't bravado. It was silence. Silence that reminded anyone watching whose ground they were standing on. And in that quiet, the balance of power shifted right back to the old man's porch, where wisdom outlasted arrogance every time. By the time the morning sun crested fully, Trevor was regretting his job description. He stood stiff, hands tremoring against his windbreaker like that extra polyester could shield him from common sense. Karen started snapping photos of everything. The porch, the woodpile, even Earl's creaky rocking chair. "Document all violations," she commanded. Earl smirked. "Careful, miss. You're already standing on trespass." The farm stretched quiet behind him, chickens pecking unaware of the drama, goats chewing like philosophers. Trevor puffed his chest. "You can't threaten officials with a gun." "That wasn't a threat," Earl said quietly. "Just a question. But I see you're not sharp with either. It hadn't always been this bad. The world Earl grew up in ran on handshakes and decency, not bylaws printed in 12-point font. But times changed, and paper tyrants multiplied. Karen muttered into her phone again, filing imaginary reports. Trevor, desperate to reclaim authority he never had, snarled, "You can't hide behind that gun forever, old man. The law's on our side." That got the faintest laugh out of Earl. Not mocking, just pitying. "Son, I was the law in these parts before you could spell bylaw." The man didn't need to raise his voice. Truth said, plain was heavy enough. By the time Trevor and Karen stomped down the long gravel drive, their pride had taken a beating. Karen typed furiously on her phone, and Trevor muttered about escalation procedures, but neither dared look back at Earl's porch. The old man just sat there, coffee half gone, watching the dust trail they left behind like smoke from a fire that never caught. A mile down the road, a familiar truck idled behind a stand of pines. Sheriff Macklin, everyone called him Mac, had been there long enough to finish a sandwich and half a thermos of iced coffee. Through binoculars, he'd watched Trevor's little performance and shook his head like a teacher spotting two kids faking homework. He tapped Earl's number on speed dial. "You got visitors, Earl?" "Had," Earl answered dryly. "Make-believe lawmen with more bark than reason," Mac chuckled. "I figured. I'll stay put a bit. If they come back, I'll make it official." "Appreciate it, Mac. But don't lose your sandwich over it." Earl hung up, leaned back in his creaky chair, and breathed in the scent of hay and peace returning slowly to the land. He glanced at the shotgun resting across his knees. Not a symbol of threat, but of boundary. Some folks used fences. Earl used principle and the occasional 12-gauge reminder. He thought about the look in Trevor's eyes, that panicked blink of someone raised on policy but never on consequence. Earl had seen that kind before overseas, behind badges, behind briefcases. They believed paper gave them spine. The goats bleated softly. Somewhere in the field, a rooster crowed late. Like it, too, wanted to punctuate the quiet. Earl smiled, took another sip of cooling coffee, and whispered to himself, "Peace sure is loud once fools leave." But the peace wasn't done being tested. Down that same road, Karen's sedan kicked up another line of dust while she barked into her phone about official backup. Earl squinted toward the horizon and sighed. "Figures," he muttered. Trouble never knew when it lost. Within the hour, the rumble of engines began again. 4 SUVs, each marked with bright HOA insignia, crawled up the road like overgrown beetles. Their orange beacons flashed in self-importance, scattering a few unlucky chickens. Earl didn't flinch. He refilled his mug, set the empty thermos beside him, and waited. If they wanted another round, he'd pour them a full cup of reality. Karen climbed out first. Sunglasses on, posture screaming authority. Behind her, Trevor tried to look confident but couldn't meet Earl's stare. A half-dozen others fanned out with clipboards and cell phones recording like paparazzi at a scandal. Karen called across the yard, her voice projecting with theatrical energy. "Sir, you are in direct violation of community ordinances. You've obstructed officials, brandished firearms, and maintained unsanctioned livestock within proximity of residency limits." Earl didn't move an inch. "You rehearsed that, or it just come natural?" Murmurs rippled through the convoy, but Karen forged ahead, reciting every subsection she could find. "You are hereby ordered to remove violations within 24 hours or face legal seizure." That last word rolled across the open air like thunder waiting for lightning. Earl sighed, set down his coffee, and stood slowly. "You done talking, ma'am?" Karen hesitated. "We're just getting started." He stepped down from his porch, boots crunching the dirt. "You stepped on my land without asking, waved paper like it's scripture, and talked about taking what you didn't earn. You sure that's wise?" Trevor puffed. "We have authority." Earl pointed at the property stake half buried by gravel. "Authority ends right there. Beyond that line, you're trespassing." And for the first time that day, it wasn't just Karen's clipboard shaking. A few of the recruits shifted back an inch, realizing they'd wandered off their map and straight into someone else's. The air tightened, heavy with waiting. Out on the road, the low growl of another engine approached. Karen straightened, thinking reinforcements. Earl smiled faintly. "That sound?" That was sanity arriving. Late afternoon light slanted gold across the fields when a third dust cloud marched from the horizon. Mac groaned when he saw it. They brought the whole chapter this time. 4 SUVs rolled in tighter formation, doors flying open before engines died. Men in identical polo shirts and tactical vests stepped out, each embroidered with an HOA crest big enough to spot from orbit. Radios crackled. Sidearms hung holstered but visible. They looked ready to host a parade or start a war. Karen strode forward, clipboard clutched like a sword. Trevor was conspicuously absent, probably hiding behind an email chain somewhere. Her voice rang across the yard. Under emergency provisions of our charter, we are authorized to enforce compliance, remove violations, and secure this property for inspection. Resistance will be documented as obstruction of justice. Mac's laugh carried over her speech like rolling thunder. Obstruction of what, exactly? Neighborhood decency? Karen ignored him. You have refused multiple warnings, Earl interrupted gently. Lady, I've refused nonsense. Big difference. The lead vest wearer, square jaw, mirrored glasses, moved up. Ma'am, let's just finish this. Sheriff, please stand aside. Mac stepped forward until the badge on his belt caught sunlight. Boys, you so much as touch a fence post, you'll be spending the night experiencing real judicial authority. The vest man hesitated. Karen hissed, Proceed! Silence caught the group like a snare. Every vest wearer stared at the line of dirt demarcating private land. None dared cross after seeing the law standing solid before them. Tension wound tight. Earl's hand rested on his knee, steady, harmless, but a reminder of the morning. Birds even quit singing. Then a deep rumble approached, a pickup, older but powerful, rolling fast. Its brakes barked, throwing a halo of dust. From it stepped County Supervisor Leonard Hayes, another veteran of real authority. He looked over the gathering, thumb hooked in his belt. What in loudmouth tarnation is this? No one answered quickly enough, which meant this standoff was about to acquire witnesses with actual jurisdiction. Leonard's boots hit the gravel with the weight of someone used to settling nonsense before lunch. Someone explain why there's a small army on a citizen's farm. Karen snapped to attention. Supervisor Hayes, we're enforcing community bylaws. He cut her off. Breathe first, paperwork later. Sheriff? Mac tipped his hat toward the group. They're private security without warrants, claiming emergency authority because they don't like Earl's goats. Leonard turned to the men in vests. You boys got any legal documents signed by a judge? The leader shook his head slowly. No, sir. Just our HOA authorization. Leonard spat dust to the side. Then congratulations, you're trespassing. Karen reddened. We will sue the county for obstruction. Leonard's laughter rolled like gravel. Ma'am, last I checked, pig-headedness isn't a protected right. Pack it up. The tactical crew exchanged looks, saw the sheriff's badge gleam, and collectively decided a paycheck wasn't worth a night in jail. They retreated to their SUVs. Karen remained, burning with fury. This isn't over, she hissed. You'll all regret this. Earl tilted his head. Regret takes energy. I'm fresh out. As her convoy sped off, Leonard turned to his old friends. People really lose their minds once they get a printed title. Mac nodded. Yeah, they put authority on a badge sticker and think physics changed. The three men stood watching the dust dissipate. For the first time that day, the air felt lighter. Earl exhaled. Appreciate the cavalry, boys. You earned it, Leonard said. I'll be filing a county report first thing tomorrow. Let's make this circus official. Mac clapped his shoulder. Coffee on me that day. Long as it ain't as strong as your stare. The day's heat began to fade, stretching shadows long over the pasture. Earl looked out across his land, the same fields he'd worked half his life, and felt the ground almost hum underfoot, satisfied. The earth respected boundary where men forgot to. He picked up his cup. Cold coffee, yes, but victory flavored it just fine. Evening crept in slow, painting every fence post in gold. Leonard lingered by the barn talking politics with Mac, laughter drifting through the thinning air like music after battle. Earl sat back on his porch, the wood remembering his weight. The shotgun leaned by the door, untouched, still the quiet symbol it had been from the start. Chickens rustled in their coop. Goats called softly from their pen, unbothered by bureaucracy. The wind picked up the faint smell of hay, cooling the sweat of the day's chaos. Earl watched the sky deepen from amber to indigo. He'd been through standoffs far grimmer than this. Bank robbers once, land disputes, even a manhunt in '74. but none quite so ridiculous. "Show wars," he muttered. "World's gone soft." Mac joined him on the steps, groaning into the seat next to him. "You figure they're done?" Earl shook his head. "People that self-righteous don't quit. They regroup." The sheriff took out a small flask, offered it. They traded a pull, fire-warming old bones. Mac chuckled. "You know, Earl, most folks defend their homes with alarms. I prefer coffee and credibility." Crickets started tuning up in the grass. For a while, they said nothing. No need. Some silences spoke like sermons. Then, from somewhere near the tool shed, came a faint metallic clang. Earl's head lifted. Mac set the flask down. Another clang followed, too deliberate to be wind. "Guess pride couldn't sleep," Earl said under his breath. The sheriff stood, hand already near his sidearm. Together they moved in practiced quiet, slipping through darkening yard shadows. Years spent on the same side of right had made their steps automatic. Earl leading between fence posts, Mac covering corners. Behind the equipment shed, the sunset caught glints off two figures crouched low. A crowbar gleamed, and someone whispered, "Hurry up!" Earl's voice cut through dusk, firm and final. "Evening, boys. Lose something?" The men froze. One dropped the tool, the other swore softly. Too late to flee. Law and landowner both had them boxed in. The curtain was about to close on Karen's last desperate act. The crowbar clanged once more before silence crushed the night. Sheriff Mac's voice boomed, steady and cold. "Hands where I can see 'em!" The flashlight in the taller man's grip swung wildly, catching both his panicked face and the tin roof behind him. Reflex drove him to drop it. The beam rolled through weeds, painting jittery shapes on the shed wall. Earl stepped forward, calm as habit. "Now, fellas, you picked the wrong evening for sightseeing." He recognized one of them, the pretend Agent Daniels from earlier, now dressed down in jeans and poor decisions. "We didn't mean no harm," Daniels stammered. "Miss Karen sent us out to take photos, verify compliance." "With a crowbar?" Mac barked. "That's creative documentation." He drew closer, flashlight now in his own hand, illuminating more guilt than explanation. The second man's knees trembled. Earl leaned just enough for moonlight to strike his profile. "Karen's been digging holes all day," he said softly. "Looks like she finally sent someone else to fall in." Daniels tried another weak line. "It's private business." "Exactly," Mac shot back. "Private property? Big difference." He snapped cuffs on both, voice never losing its measured authority. The metallic click echoed like punctuation on stupidity. "Gentlemen, you're under arrest for trespass and attempted break-in," Daniels protested. "You can't," Mac interrupted, tone sharp as barbed wire. "Son, I could have 3 counties listening in before you finish that sentence." Earl simply shook his head. Pride makes fools work over time. When Mac radioed dispatch, static filled the air. A deputy answered, promising a unit en route. Crickets resumed their song, unbothered by human drama. Earl watched the 2 men slump against the shed, eyes on the dirt. Somewhere between arrogance and fear, they finally found silence, the one thing they should have brought with them. 15 minutes later, the wail of an approaching cruiser pierced the quiet. 2 red-blue beams sliced through the trees, washing the barn and fences in flashing confession. The deputy, a young man still polishing his batch of experience, stepped out wide-eyed at the tableau. Leans, crowbar, and the sheriff himself standing like sentence incarnate. "Evening, Sheriff," he greeted carefully. "Evening. Dale, pick up our overnight guests here." Dale guided the cuffed men toward the prowler. The shorter one mumbled an excuse about orders from management. Mac raised an eyebrow so sharp it could sign paperwork. "Tell it downtown. I'll make sure Karen's name's on the transcript." Earl lingered a few feet back, the porch light outlining him like an old statue of grit. When Dale drove off, tires scattering dust into the humid air, silence returned. Thicker now, but cleaner somehow. Mac exhaled a slow breath. "You ought to put up cameras, Earl. Save me some gas next time." "I prefer confrontations served face-to-face," Earl replied. "Less paperwork, more clarity." They laughed quietly, 2 men sharing the relief that comes after order reasserts itself. The crickets, sensing detente, resumed full chorus. Overhead, a few bats zigzagged between barn rafters like errant punctuation marks to the evening. "You think Karen'll try another stunt?" Mac asked. "Oh, she will," Earl said. "But every complaint letter's easier to ignore than armed trespassers." Mac stretched his back, bones crackling like gravel under boots. "I'll file charges, make calls by dawn." "Don't worry, county prosecutor's seen enough of her kind lately." Earl nodded approval. "Good. Maybe a paper trail's the only language she speaks." They stood there another minute, watching the cruiser's fading lights until darkness swallowed the road again. The air smelled of hay, soil, and one more victory for common sense. Back on the porch, Earl poured the last of his morning brew into a fresh cup. It was stone cold but tasted better than anything victory usually offers. Mac sat down beside him, groaning into the chair that had survived every decade of county gossip. "Feels strange," the sheriff said. "Running defense over goats and chipped paint." "World's crazier by the week," Earl answered. "Used to be folks argued over fences. Now it's font sizes on HOA notices." Mac chuckled, rubbing his forehead. "Still, you handled yourself decent." Earl grinned. "Decent? I stayed polite till polite ran out. Then I sat down." They both laughed, light spilling from the windows behind them, outlining decades of friendship. Through open screens drifted the faint ticking of the kitchen clock, steady, indifferent to human folly. Mac took out his notebook, scribbling quick details so nothing would get lost in paperwork translation. "You know," he said, "county'll make a fine example out of this. Folks been forgetting where authority starts and stops." "Good," Earl replied. "Maybe they'll remember common sense ain't optional." A cool breeze swept off the pasture. The animals had settled. Even the night insects lowered their volume. Earl leaned back, eyes fixed on the horizon's faint glow from the nearby town. "You think she's asleep right now or pacing holes in her floor?" "Karen?" Mac smirked. "Probably drafting her fourth apology letter that sounds like a lawsuit." "Let her," Earl said. "Words can't cross a fence any better than she can." They clinked mugs, the sheriff's coffee, Earl's stubbornness, and sat in easy silence until the clock chimed midnight. Cutting the day clean in half, hours passed. The world shrank to the creak of porch wood, the sigh of leaves, and the memory of adrenaline slowly washing out of old veins. Earl's property breathed again, the kind of heavy, honest exhale that only comes after nonsense has ended. Mac stood at last, hat in hand. "I'll keep the cruiser nearby till sunup, just in case she finds more hired help." "Appreciate that," Earl said, "but I reckon the lesson's taken." Still, Mac didn't argue. Pride's a poor student. They shared another small laugh. The sheriff walked toward his car, gravel crunching softly. Radios crackling faint reports of normalcy elsewhere, DUIs, coyotes, nothing worth writing poems about. Earl remained seated, gaze tracing constellations. He'd always believed the heavens tell old-timers when they've done right. Every star, a tiny nod of approval. Tonight, they seemed brighter. He thought of his late wife, of the quiet she'd loved on that porch, how she'd tease him for sipping coffee cold. "Guess you still scare away solicitors," she would have said, smiling. Somewhere far off, an owl hooted. Earl smiled back at the darkness. "Still got it, darling." Behind him, the farmhouse clock ticked on, rhythmic and forgiving. When Mac's cruiser headlights disappeared over the hill, full dark settled like a blanket. For a few treasured minutes, nothing existed but crickets and the far hum of distant freeway, the modern world politely keeping its distance. Earl closed his eyes, letting the chair rock once, twice. The kind of peace earned, not borrowed. Sunrise crept slow the next day, amber rays filtering through barn slats. Dew slicked the grass. The air smelled of sweet hay and vindication. Earl was already up feeding chickens, motion practiced as breathing. The old goats greeted him like fans at Encore. From down the road came another familiar rumble. The sheriff again, coffee thermos balanced on the dashboard. Mac rolled to a stop, waved. "County supervisors filing official notice today? Your name's cleared clean." "Karen's? Let's say paperwork's gonna sting?" "Good. Maybe sting will teach caution," Earl replied, pouring feed from a bucket. County's talking about reviewing HOA boundaries, Mac continued. Apparently a few folks been complaining about overreach, Earl smirked. Imagine that, common sense spreading faster than gossip. They shared a laugh. Mac handed over a folded newspaper. The headline, Sheriff Foils Unauthorized HOA Raid. Earl adjusted his glasses, read the piece twice, and chuckled deep in his chest. Didn't think I'd hit the papers again without fishing contest results. You're local fame now. Expect pie deliveries, Mac teased. Hope it's Apple. I fought wars for less. The humor softened into comfortable quiet. The sheriff eventually took his leave, headed for town hall duties. As the cruiser vanished, Earl rested both hands on the fence, looking out over the paddock. The fields shimmered with early light, proof that right still outlasted wrong if you held your ground politely enough. He lifted the mug of fresh coffee, steaming bright as morning mercy, and muttered, "World 1, paperwork 0. Karen Whitmore slammed her office door hard enough to rattle cheap blinds. All morning, phone calls had flayed what was left of her authority. County Supervisor Hayes had left a message requesting an immediate review of practices. Translation: she'd overstepped. Hard. She paced between piles of binders labeled codes and protocols, each one now glaring like witnesses. Trevor sat in the corner nursing bruised pride and lukewarm coffee. "You told me the sheriff had no jurisdiction," she snapped. I thought she cut him off. Thinking isn't your department." In truth, Karen wasn't evil, just convinced the world looked better laminated. But power, even paper thin, was addictive, and losing it hurt worse than guilt. Her phone chimed again. New voicemail from County Legal. She didn't listen. The tone already carried disappointment. Around her, the grand office looked smaller. The trophies and certificates now seemed sarcastic. Trevor finally muttered, "Maybe we should apologize." Karen glared. "For enforcing order?" He shrugged. "For trespassing on the wrong man's morning." She sank into her chair, the first cracks of humility forming. For a moment, she pictured Earl's calm eyes, the unshakable stillness that had made all her rules feel like child's play. That image didn't fade. It lingered. The haunting truth that genuine authority rests in composure, not clipboards. By noon, she drafted an official resignation for health reasons. The printer spat the page out accusingly. She stared at her name at the bottom, sighed, and signed it. Outside, the wind rustled a nearby oak, mischievous, free, disorganized. Maybe rules didn't need to fence everything after all. News of the standoff rippled through every diner and hardware store in 3 counties. People told it half right, half wild, but every version ended the same: an old man, a shotgun, and 2 bureaucrats who forgot whose dirt they were standing on. At Henderson's Cafe, the regulars toasted Earl between sips of burnt coffee. "He didn't shoot," someone said, "just looked at him till they remembered the Constitution." Laughter rattled the windows. Earl, meanwhile, stayed clear of gossip. He had chores. Fame didn't keep goats fed. Still, each passerby honked in friendly salute. Every wave came with grins of shared rebellion. Even the mailman delivered letters carefully, like entering holy ground. Among those envelopes was one from County Hall, a simple statement confirming all charges dropped. Rights reaffirmed, property boundaries recognized indefinitely. Earl folded it neatly, pinned it to the wall beside his late wife's photo. "Told you I'd manage, sweetheart." That evening, Max stopped by again, bearing a pie wrapped in foil. "From Betty Henderson," he said. "Town's collective thank you note. Apple? Double crust." They ate on the porch, plates balanced on knees, sunset painting soft lines across the world. "You ever think about selling this place?" Mac asked idly. Earl looked out over shining fences. "Sell peace? No buyers rich enough." When twilight deepened, the first stars arrived, always punctual. Mac stood, wiping crumbs from his uniform. "You keep proving paperwork useless, they'll elect you sheriff again?" Earl chuckled. "Too much paperwork." Weeks passed. Summer fattened the fields. The saga became legend before the hay harvest. Leonard oversaw an official county memorandum tightening HOA limits. Mac forwarded a copy to Earl with a note. Told you so. Across town, Karen's replacement, a modest teacher named June Marley, used the mess as her first cautionary tale. First meeting, she told her board. Power only works if it respects borders. Every head nodded. Even Trevor, now demoted to community liaison. Back on his farm, Earl worked fence posts under a forgiving sun. While hammering wire, he heard hoofbeats. Mac on horseback, off duty for once. Figured I'd trade my cruiser for nostalgia. Earl grinned. Good. Gas prices will thank you. They rode the fence line, talking little. Sometimes silence was the only vocabulary men like them needed. At the property's edge, Mac reined in. You know Earl might print a sign for you. Caution. Common sense zone ahead. Earl laughed. Might keep fools out better than a shotgun. They lingered atop a small rise overlooking the valley. The fields glowed, calm and protected. Mac said finally, Funny weather we live in. Storm of rules, drizzle of wisdom. Then we keep umbrellas of patience, Earl replied. Horse snorted. Birds flitted. Conversation drifted into the same rhythm as wind in dry grass, unhurried, certain. A month later, an envelope arrived embossed with county seal. Inside, an official commendation recognizing civil restraint and defense of private rights. Earl chuckled. Never thought not shooting someone during a certificate. He framed it, not out of ego, but as history for grandchildren who might someday ask why Grandpa's chair had a legend of its own. Under the frame, he pinned a smaller card sent by Mac. Respect isn't enforced. It's earned quietly. Business went on. The farm sold eggs, goats supplied milk to a neighboring creamery, and peace resumed its post on the porch. Each evening, Earl sat in that same creaky chair, tapping rhythm on its arm with worn fingers. Visitors came often, curious or grateful. He told them the story short, stripped of drama. Couple folks tried to forget law only bends so far. Sheriff reminded them. Sometimes he added softer truths. Don't let anger own you. Stillness shakes folks harder. The younger generation listened wide-eyed, smartphones recording. Earl let them. Maybe calmness needed new advertisements. One evening, Mac drove by one last time before vacation, leaving a fresh thermos. Peace offering, he called it. Earl sniffed the lid. You finally used real beans. Had to honor the legend. They laughed. Two men lined between them, etched forever in respect. Dusk settled gentle, filling every shadow cup with amber. The farm stood exactly as it had before any convoy or clipboard arrived. Fence straight, animals fed, dignity intact. Earl sat rocking. Each creak kept beat with crickets. Inside the doorway rested the old shotgun, polished, peaceful, never needed, but always respected. Stars blinked alive overhead. Mac's taillights had long vanished, yet their glow seemed to linger like memory. Earl tipped his hat back, gazing upward. You can try to map authority, he murmured. But the sky never signs contracts. He thought about Karen, wherever she'd landed, hoping she'd learned that order without empathy breeds rebellion faster than weeds. He even chuckled, pity instead of anger. That was victory enough. From the fields rose the scent of cut hay. Wind carried distant laughter from neighbors. Somewhere down the county road, a dog barked twice, decided it wasn't worth pursuit, and stopped, a fine metaphor for wisdom itself. Earl lifted his cooling mug, gave the stars a quiet toast. To fences well kept, tempers well reined, and peace well earned. The porch creaked once more as he leaned back, eyes half closed. The world turned simple again. Good soil, honest work, and boundaries written not on paper, but in hearts that remembered what fairness sounds like. The last light slid behind the barn, leaving the whole place wrapped in that holy hush farmers know. Day finished, night kind, conscience clear, and in that silence, the story ended as it began. An old man, a chair, and a calm strong enough to stop foolishness in its tracks.